Hello and welcome back to the Whole Life podcast. My name is Grace Fielding.
And I'm Paul Woolley, and today we're talking about theatre. Well, it's good to be back with another great topic to discuss today. Here's a question for you, Grace. Are you a fan of theatre? I asked that question with a slight degree of trepidation because I'm aware that our special guest literally is in the wings. But what's your response to that?
I do like the theatre, Paul. I would say I don't go as often as I would like to, but every theatre show I've ever been to has been brilliant. I have this special fond memory of bit of a fun fact about me. I did ballet as a kind of child, but all the way through to when I was about 18. And we went to see, as a kind of ballet school, we went to see Sister Act together, which I thought was brilliant and was a kind of a nice memory of theatre. More recently, I went to see Hamilton, I think maybe last year or the year before. I mean, who hasn't been to see Hamilton? I feel
I
like.
haven't.
Well,
No,
there we go.
no, I haven't. I need to. That is on my list. What about Panto? Were you a Panto family growing up, Grace?
We went to the odd panto. I wouldn't say it was like, I know for some people it's like the kind of, the yearly tradition. How about you, Paula? Your family, your
Well, it
children?
was. It
Oh,
was.
really? Okay.
It was a significant tradition, which I have to say has been disbanded under present management. But I mean, that implies that present management won't be continuous management. But the present Mrs. Woolley, it wasn't part of her tradition. And it was part of mine. And I would say, interesting enough, that theatre is one of those experiences, isn't it, that is unlike possibly anything else. I mean, quite unlike film, the sense of immediacy, I think, and connection, and the sort of ability to play with your emotions. But in the last year, I mean, like you, not a huge amount, but in the last year, I've seen the Mousetrap, who were doing their nationwide tour, which was great. I've seen Blood Brothers, which that's I think a powerful musical and plays to all sorts of emotions, and it explores that whole thing about nature and nurture, which is really interesting. And then, oh yes, uh, Adam Frost. Now, he's not probably a name you're familiar with, Grace,
No.
but he is a co-presenter on a program called Gardener's World,
Oh, yes, I've
which
heard of
is
that.
actually, with a particular demographic, is very popular. And he was doing a kind
Is
of
that your
evening.
demographic, Paul?
Yeah, thank. Should we, in fact, let's just introduce our subject now.
Yeah, I think
Grace.
we should.
Well, it was Oscar Wilde who said, "I regard the theatre as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being. The success and popularity of theatre districts such as the West End in London and New York's Broadway speak for themselves. There's clearly something special about theatre which keeps people coming back for more. But what is the link between the Christian story and theatre? And what does it look like to work as a Christian in theatre?"
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest for today, Naomi Alade, who is a British actor, singer, and dancer. Naomi trained in musical theatre at University of West London and has been working in the industry for the last 3 years. She's currently in the West End cast of Six the Musical, as an alternate of Anne of Cleves and Anne Boleyn. But she's also starred previously in Beautiful, the Carole King musical, Eugenius, and the Robin Hood pantomime. There we go, at the Oxford Playhouse. She's also a worship leader and has previously worked as a fitness and Pilates instructor. Is there anything that our special guest today cannot do? Naomi, thank you so much for joining us on the Whole Life podcast. We're so looking forward to our conversation. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good.
Great. Well, I thought we could perhaps start by getting to know you a bit. Obviously, I've done my own intro, but it's always nice to hear from the guest themselves. So, could you perhaps share a bit about your journey into performing arts? Were you one of those people that, as a child, you always knew that this was what you wanted to do?
I'd say that definitely wasn't necessarily my story. I always, I suppose, had a love and appreciation for it, but I didn't grow up like going to theatre school and knowing like, oh, I wanted this, what I want to do when I grow up. But I knew I liked singing. Like that was kind of, I suppose, my first love of the three like disciplines. Um, and so kind of enjoyed singing, like would sing at church and all that kind of stuff. And then when it came to deciding what I wanted to do for uni, I was like, okay, well, English is what I'm good at. It's what I study. Like I was pretty much purely academic up until going to uni.
Okay.
And so I was studying English, sociology, Spanish, history. Like that was kind of my trajectory. And I thought I was going to go study English, but I thought, okay, if I go and study English at uni, like what exactly am I going to do with that? Like I don't really want to teach, and like that's kind of the only thing I could see myself doing if I studied English. Not that if you study English, that's what you're going to do,
No,
but
yeah.
I kind of couldn't really see the
Mm.
vision past that. So I thought, okay, well, I like singing and I like acting and I like dancing a bit, so maybe I should just like give like musical theatre a go. Like maybe I'll just like do some auditions and see what happens. And I was kind of like, if God opens the door, then I'll go, and then if He
Mm.
doesn't, then I'll kind of just figure something else out and I'll see where I end up. And so did some auditions, got like way more no's than yeses, but then ended up getting a place to study musical theatre at UWL. And then I was like, well, I feel like that's the open door for me, so I'm
Mm.
gonna go. And it wasn't a door that kind of came without its without disappointments prior to that.
Mm.
So it wasn't really just like an easy, oh, like I feel like I should go do this now. Now I'm gonna do an audition and get in, and yay, like it's happening. Like there was a lot of like obstacles before that point, but kind of the door opened and I went, and then I suppose the rest is history.
Yeah, amazing. I'm fascinated to know what kind of typical day in your life looks like when you're on tour and with a production. So obviously I mentioned at the start, you're currently part of the cast of Six. So what does that look like? Kind of an average day. And also, if people haven't heard of Six the musical, maybe you can give them a little plug of why they should come and see you.
So Six is very much like a very modern reimagining of the lives of the six wives of Henry VIII.
Mhm.
And historically, it is very accurate.
Okay.
But the way that it's put on, the way that it's displayed is like very, very modern and uses like kind of modern pop influences in its music.
Okay.
Um, and kind of relates each of the queens kind of takes on the persona of like lots of really great women in music. So you
Mhm.
kind of see nods to Beyonce and Britney and all these different women through the music, which is really cool. And yeah, it's just a very empowering, very unifying um, way of presenting this group of women who kind of have since been seen as just one of many, or being
Mm.
seen as women who are just put up against each other, Um, so that's kind of Six.
Mm.
And I don't know if anyone's seen the costumes, but I think the costumes are a draw within themselves to come and see the
Okay.
show. Because I tell you, that's not what they were wearing back then. Um, but I'd say the typical day is, it depends. Currently, I'm in on the West End, so I am in London, like, and that's where I stay for this contract. But having toured before, kind of a day in the life very much looks like waking up in whatever city
Mm.
you've been sent to, um, and usually figuring out. For me, it was always like, where's the nearest coffee shop or brunch place I can
Too
go?
right. I can get behind that.
Yeah. Um, and it's hard because being on tour, like you're away from everything, right? So you're like, hey, what can I do? Like, what is there around? So usually like food, figuring out, doing a bit of exploring, sightseeing, and then usually heading into work. And the thing about touring anyway is that all usually in a different theatre every week, depending, sometimes it's every month, just depends on how regularly you move. But there's often a lot to get used to in terms of being in a different theatre. And so usually there's like tech involved in that, in putting the set into a different space and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, then usually it's, once you've done a tech, once you've arrived, it's probably about an hour break for food. Then you start getting into costume, wigs, and then it happens and you do the show.
Amazing.
And I suppose it's a relatively similar kind of routine for being in town. Like, usually we have usually late starts. Usually you're in about 2 hours before the show starts. Um, but then prior to that, especially at least for me being a cover, there's usually other rehearsals involved, and you're constantly rehearsing, constantly just making sure you're on top of your stuff. So there's usually like about 2 hours of rehearsal um, on top of like a day's work, some days in the week. And at least with Six anyway, there's usually like press stuff, like different press events, interviews, performances here and there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Fascinating, isn't it? To get an insight into a different world. That's
Mm.
certainly very different from my world. Although I have done a bit of touring, but that can be quite isolating, can't it? As well as it being kind of interesting and taking you to new places. So interesting to get a little bit of an insight into all of that, Naomi. Let's talk a little bit about the connection between the Christian story and theatre. And let me leave with you a couple of thoughts and ask you to reflect on those. I guess the first thought is that people often talk about the drama of Scripture. So, a sense in which the Christian story is a unifying story, but it comprises a number of distinct acts. And personally, I'm a 6 acts man. So, like the idea of framing Scripture in terms of creation and sin, Israel, Jesus, mission and the early church, and then new creation. So, I'd love to hear your reflections on that in terms of, if you like, the connection between that story and those acts and what theatre is and what it does. And then I suppose the second thought I'd love you to reflect on is that I'm struck that whilst not an actor, Jesus was clearly an extraordinary performer. He was an extraordinary communicator. I mean, he must have been, to be able to retain the sort of crowds that he was able to capture. So how do you reflect on both of those things? The idea of Scripture being itself a drama comprising different acts, and then Jesus as a if not a performer, a communicator, a storyteller, and then how that relates to you and the world of theatre.
Those are two really good points. I think on the first one, I think the first thing that came to my mind was that like every story has every good story has conflict and has a problem. And it's kind of like we exist in a story before the problem and everything is fine and bliss and whatever. Then the problem arises. And then we're like, okay, that's where kind of the drama begins. Then we think, okay, who is going to solve this problem? How do we solve this problem? And then ideally the problem gets solved. And then that's usually the end of the story. And so I think that's pretty much exactly kind of those 6 different stages you described. Like that's very much the story in which we exist in today. Where God created the world and he created it that we'd be in fellowship with him. And then the problem arose, which was the fall. And now we're kind of living in that time where we're kind of almost, and we have obviously Jesus, thank God. And we're existing and living, if you're a Christian, you live knowing Jesus and having Jesus live on the inside of you, but we're still existing in this fallen world and kind of still waiting for that ultimate um, kind of problem solving moment that kind of erases everything and changes everything. And I think that's how I see it. And so we're kind of just, existing in this like really big adventure story, but then also you think like even in each of our individual lives, like knowing Jesus and the different kind of purposes and plans that we've all been given, kind of all for the same, leading towards the same conclusion. That we make disciples of all people, right? And we're all placed in different places and with different jobs and different lives in order to kind of do that same thing. I think, wow, like we kind of are living in this like macro story, but then also each have these different micro stories that like all lead up to that big moment, that climax that we're waiting for, which is Jesus coming back. And I think, yeah, we're just like living in the ultimate drama. So if anyone like is thinking, oh, how do I write a good book? They should go read the Bible and then be like, oh, that's how I write a
Yeah.
good book.
And what about the idea of then Jesus in terms of as the, if you like, the great performer, or the person that's certainly able to engage large audiences and narrate a different world to them? I mean, do you find inspiration in that?
Mm. I mean, I think to be a good storyteller in any way, you need to be compassionate and you need to have a level of understanding people and desiring to understand people. And I think that's, the beauty of Jesus, right? And um, is that he knows us and knows us so closely, better than we know ourselves. And I think actually that's why it was a great storyteller, because he's someone who understands the people that he's speaking to, and he's not speaking from a place of, oh, like, I just know better and I'm trying to tell you to do better. It's like, no, like, I see you and I know you and I know your pain and I know your struggle. And I want best for you. So to speak from that place means that, one, you engage your audience because they don't feel far from you, but then also because Jesus is perfect, we know that the person we're listening to can be fully trusted. And so I think actually, yeah, that Jesus is a great storyteller. And to be honest, I never really thought about that in relation to what I do too much, in a way, actually. So it was really interesting to think on that. Um, but yeah, I think that's what I'd have to say on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm trying to think if I can think of a story or a play that doesn't have a plot and setting and characters and a point of view and conflict and resolution and some sort of overarching theme. All of those elements are in the biblical story, but it's hard to imagine a story or a play that doesn't contain those. I mean, yeah, Six definitely does, doesn't it? So it has all of those elements within it, which is so interesting. Instantly, will you indulge me? I've got just your thoughts about the fall. They prompted me to think of one of my favorite jokes. Can I just share that? Would you mind, Grace? So this is to do with the fall, and as we know, Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent. And who did the serpent blame? He just didn't have a leg to stand on.
Oh dear, that was worse than I even thought it might be.
Naomi, talk to us about the extent to which the audience are also participants in theatre. So one of the things I've been reflecting on a bit is that the biblical story, it invites us to be an actor in the story. The Christian story isn't, if you like, passive, but we are invited to be active participants, and participants ultimately with God in terms of God's great project, which is the reconciliation and renewal of all things. So to what extent does theatre require the audience to be a participant, an actor in the story, would you say? And I mean, to what extent do you think that's just the same as film, or is there something distinctive about theatre?
I do think even within theatre, it very much depends on the show. I think there's some things that you would go and see where you are expected to just be quiet and watch and basically just engage. And I suppose even that in itself doesn't mean that it's passive. It just means that you engage in a way that is probably largely silent or just more pensive. Whereas a show like Six or like a panto, it's very much set up like without the audience, it's almost like the show cannot happen. Like, we need your engagement. Like, we open the show by saying, London, how are you doing? Like, and we need that kind of like, we need that force back at us. And so I think, yeah, largely theatre in itself, even if it is a show that is more so kind of like it's set up like a Shakespeare or it's a very serious play, it does still need the audience's engagement. And there is still like, we as actors still have to make space for moments of sadness where we feel like, oh, we definitely need like a little break here because we know that people are probably going to have been moved by what just happened. So we need to kind of like slow the pace down in this area, or, you know, we know that people are expected to laugh here. So like we've got to, you know, just make sure we give a pause so we can carry on things seamlessly. So I
And can
think,
you tell the difference? I mean, obviously you're essentially, I mean, in some ways it's very repetitive, isn't it? You're performing the same thing again and again and again. But if you do that before an audience who are highly engaged compared with one that just might not be, I mean, are there such things? I mean, can you tell a difference between audiences? And does that actually make then a difference to the performance?
very much so. I think you learn how to tell the difference quite quickly. At least with Six anyway, I feel like that's been a massive like training ground, is like just from that first moment, like when we kind of were expecting to receive a response, we can very much kind of tell from that first response what the show might be like. And so that kind of helps us as well to just be like, okay, we know that we can, and I mean, we always give it 100%, but we just know, okay, today, like these guys might need a bit more encouraging, or we know that like we can probably zoom through things a little bit quicker because, you know, they're just engaging in a different way. And so I think you learn over time how to kind of like deal with the differences. And I do think that film and TV are different in the sense that there is no, you're not affecting really the actors in real time in
Yeah,
terms of how you respond. So if I'm watching an episode of TV now and I go pause it to go put my washing on and whatever, they're not sitting there waiting for me.
yeah,
Whereas, you know, like in theatre, like everything that kind of happens in the audience, like we're all in the same room together at the same time. So it's kind of like a real synergy where what you do affects us and what we do affects you. Whereas with TV and film, I think there's a level of detachment in that way.
yeah. You do get immediate feedback, I guess, haven't you? I mean, it couldn't be more immediate, could you?
Yes.
You're
Um,
not just waiting to read the review, but you're seeing it live.
yeah. And there's kind of not this very polished and like cleaned up and edited product. What happens on the day is what happens on the day. Like, and that can't be changed. If something goes wrong in the moment, like there is no like, oh, it's fine. We'll cut there. We'll do it again. And that footage will never be seen again. It's you figure out how to make it work in the moment. And that's it.
Yeah, interesting. Now, Naomi, at the top, I quoted Oscar Wilde. I have to say, Grace and I had a little bit of a discussion about this before the recording because what Oscar Wilde says, Thornton Wilder, who was an American playwright and novelist, seemed to say something remarkably similar. So we think it could be an early example of plagiarism. But what Oscar Wilde said was he talked about regarding theatre as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be human. And then I was reflecting on something that either C.S. Lewis said or should have said, but basically I remember it from the film Shadowlands, which was about his life. And in that film, the line there's a line in the film which is we read to know we are not alone. And I wonder how you would reflect on both of those things, the Oscar Wilde and the C.S. Lewis, in terms of theatre. I mean, to what extent do you think they were right? And what role does theatre have in helping us understand God, the world, and ourselves? Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all good theatre is a reflection of society in some way because we are just humans, like playing humans. And we might be dressed up in different clothes and we might be, you know, like in different time periods or whatever. By the end of the day, it's a human being a human. And I think that in every way, theatre works when people can look at the stage and see something of themselves. And even if that's not in the most, like, I don't know, in the most nuanced way, even if that just is, you know, a little girl coming to see a show like Six and think, oh, wow, like, I am such like a chaotic, crazed ball of energy like that one. that even if that's the only kind of mirror that you find for yourself, I think that is just as valuable, because then you think, wow, actually there are other people like me, or like, at least these people are presented as people who I see myself as quite similar to. And I think actually theatre works, acting works when we're being as truthful to ourselves as humans as we can be, and we're being as sensitive to um, what human beings are and what we go through. Um, and I just think that that's theatre at its best, and that's kind of why I wanted to do it in the first place. Like, um, you want to go and see people like yourself, and even if it's just on a surface level, like, too often have I gone to see theatre and not seen people who even look like me. And then you think, wow, like, does this mean that people who look like me don't experience certain things in life? Like, and we only experience this set of things because I always see us in this particular kind of setting, whereas I never see us in this particular type of setting. So, like, are we like allowed that too? Like, can we do that too? Like, I haven't seen someone who looks like me, being presented as doing this job or this or that, and you think, oh, can I do that, or is that for me? And and I think people just need to know, like, that they're not alone, like one of those quotes he said. And people, I think, yeah, want to see something of themselves that makes them feel less um isolated.
Yeah. Which is what's so interesting about Six, isn't it? In that you do have a diversity of actors from a whole range of backgrounds who do look different, but they're playing parts that um, we associate with a person who does look in a particular way, for example. So that's interesting how that sort of, changes that, shakes it up a bit. In view of what you've said, Naomi, what do you think the role of theatre is or could be in terms of telling the Christian story? I'm thinking now of examples like passion plays, musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar. How is theatre, or is theatre, uniquely placed to share the Christian story, would you say?
Hmm. I almost think that I feel like I'm yet, other than I suppose like passion plays, which are very much like, this is kind of like, we're lifting up this truthful story and just presenting it to you. Um, I think I'm yet to see a piece of theatre that I feel like really does put on display kind of like what it means to be, like, redeemed, what it is to like meet, to see a person come to know Jesus. And I do think actually it's the perfect medium for it.
Yes.
But I do think that maybe where there might be not necessarily a clash, but I think theatre can become so much about people being entertained and people being stimulated, that actually those stories that are really meaningful, and the stories that I feel like really do have people seeing themselves and all that stuff, that sometimes they actually don't get as much attention or airtime because they're not big and flashy and colorful and shiny. And I think actually theatre is a great medium for us to tell the Christian story. And I think often, I mean, understandably, in the kind of society we live in, I think people are very afraid of that. Um, and yeah, so I almost feel like I'm yet to see something that I feel like really is openly, outwardly Christian and says, hey, this is what it looks like to, meet Jesus and live life with Jesus. But I do think it's the perfect medium for it.
Sounds like there's maybe an opportunity there for someone to write something or
Yeah.
something to be
I wish that
creative.
person was me.
Well, you never know, Naomi.
I know, but yeah.
um, Naomi, it's so yeah, I think it's so interesting hearing your reflections on all of these different things, which some of which I feel like I've never really given any thought to in the context of theatre. So, thank you for being so thoughtful and
Mm.
thought provoking for us too. I'd love to hear a bit more about kind of your own personal experience working in theatre, especially as a Christian. And I wondered, well, first of all, kind of a bit more of a kind of open question. What would you say would be your kind of your best thing that you find about working in theatre, and your worst thing. They don't have to necessarily be linked to your faith, but just, what are the kind of highlights and the lowlights of being in that kind of career?
I think the best thing is, it just really does have to be, I think, the reaction, like, of the audience, like,
Mm,
and how much, like, going to the theatre can often mean a lot to people. And so when you've been able to play a really active part in that, I think that's like the best thing ever. Like, it's like people's birthday present to go see a show,
mm,
or people take their, like, friend on a hen do or whatever, and you just think, wow,
mm,
like, to be a part of moments like that in people's lives on, like,
yeah.
a massive scale, I think is really special. I think the hardest thing can be probably the rejection,
Mm,
and the lack of stability, um,
mm.
that is involved in doing this as a career.
Yeah, yeah. No, they're very honest answers, and I think it's interesting what you were saying about kind of being part of memorable moments in people's lives. And I think when I think back to all the movies I've gone to see over the years, and this isn't necessarily criticism on the films, but I think just the environment and the
Mm,
as we've spoken about, the kind of engagement and interaction that you have as being part of the audience, they're nothing in comparison to the memories of. I mean, if you asked me what movies I'd seen in the last year, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you.
yeah.
Whereas actually, when I think about, I probably could, if I really, sat down and gave it some thought, think of every single show I've ever been to see at theatre, because there's
Mm,
something about it that kind of, maybe it's that kind of whole immersive experience, and as you said, it's that real time engagement, which is just
yeah.
unparalleled. um so that was really interesting. So in terms of kind of your faith, and how you approach the work that you do, um would you say there's a level of kind of discernment needed, or are there certain things that so for example, an audition, would you approach a job or an audition in a certain way influenced by your faith? For example, are there certain jobs that you wouldn't consider taking because of your faith, or kind of how do you navigate that kind of whole idea?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a level of discernment needed, and the kind of I think there has to be a level of, like, boldness to make those calls for yourself early rather
Mm,
than later. I think it's easier to, I mean, and it's obviously a very hard industry to say no in, because you're
mm,
thinking all you ever get told is, well, if you don't do it, someone else will do it. And,
yeah.
like, you're the one without a job. So you're thinking beggars can't be choosers. Like, that's kind of the mentality that we have a lot of the time. And I think, but I have to think, actually, this is like part of, I can't compartmentalize my work and my faith and everything. It all melds into one, like,
Mm,
it's my life. So I have to be discerning about, okay, if I look into this, is this something that I'd be comfortable doing? No. And if that's the case, then I just have to say that. And
mm,
thankfully, I have an agent who I think is really quite understanding, and, like, and I think actually everyone, for any reason, needs to have the boldness to say no to things,
mm,
even if, like, you're just like, oh, I'm gonna go to this audition because it's the only one I've had for a while, and, but I really would rather not even do the actual thing, like. And obviously that takes a lot of weighing up. Like, it's not just this too hard of an industry you can't say no to everything, but you also can't say yes to everything. So
mm,
I think, yeah, there's definitely things that I know that I would not do, that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing, and I'm just honest about that. And I can't
yeah.
say that that's always the easiest thing, because it's not. I don't want it to be like, oh yeah, yeah, just say no. It's never that easy. Like, but I do think it's important to um be able to, yeah, just put your foot down and say, I would rather not do that. It's just, I'm not comfortable with that. um and at the end of the day, there's probably a comfort to be found in the fact that someone else will do it, because it's not going to fall
Mm,
apart if you don't.
mm,
But then that also comes with having a level of faith and trust that, okay, well, if I do say no to that, like, God's plan is better, and,
mm,
like, it's okay. Like, that's not me, like, upending my whole career by saying no to this. it's just waiting to say yes to the right thing,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
And I guess like thinking about what you were saying in terms of one of the hardest or the sort of worst parts or aspects of the industry is the lack of stability. I'd imagine actually saying no to a job feels quite costly at points.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's amazing that you have that attitude of kind of, I suppose it's that kind of that moral instinct, isn't it? And I'm sure that you're able to be an encouragement to other people sometimes in that, actually we don't have to say yes to everything all the time, even though that probably can feel quite countercultural within the
Yeah.
context you're in.
Mm.
Would you say that there's also kind of a culture, and this is me making assumptions, so feel free to say that it's not like this, but a kind of culture of kind of competitiveness and perfectionism within the kind of performing arts world that you have to deal with? And if so, kind of how do you navigate this as a Christian, I suppose?
Mm. I mean, I'm very much a perfectionist. I think I always have been. Um, and I think that very much can be the nature of this industry. And I think it can be the nature of the industry when you're auditioning and also even when you're in the job. I think because it's almost like you're consistently put up against other people. You're put up against other people to get the job, you're put up against other people to yeah, you're just constantly set up. And I think it's hard because I think a level of competitive now I can't say the word. A level of like
Competitiveness.
a level, I was gonna say competitivism. I was like, that's not the word. A level of competitiveness is good in the sense that I think we should consistently be trying to better ourselves. I think there has to be a level of like knowing that you want to be disciplined in all the things that you're doing in order to improve yourself, in order to set yourself up as best as you can to achieve what you want to achieve. I think that's really important. But to do that against other people who are completely different to you, who have completely different journeys to you, completely different talents, completely different upbringings, everything, I think is just like pointless because what is best for both of you is very different. And I think you're on completely different journeys, but I think it can be hard because you'll go into a room for an audition and most likely be around people who are very similar to you. So that kind of makes you think, okay, well, I want to be the best one out of all of these, even though we're all really similar. It kind of starts to make you feel like, oh, rather than you need to be the best version of yourself, it's like you feel like you need to be the best version of this set of people that you've been put up against. And so I think I have to constantly remind myself, you just go in there and do the best that you can do and show them yourself. And then if it's you that they want, that's who they'll pick. And if it isn't you, that's not because you weren't enough. It's just because there was just something else and someone else that they wanted that fit for a different reason. But I think, you have to remind yourself that you can only be the best version of yourself and improve at what you're good at. And so think about that, find those things that you're good at and work on those. But then even that, I say that and can risk wanting to do that to a level of perfection that is not attainable. And so I have to tell myself, and if anything, I think actually working in the industry and doing the shows on stage, like really quickly makes you realize that things are not perfect and things will not be perfect all the time. Sometimes your voice is going to give out. Sometimes you put a foot wrong and you go the wrong way, especially when you cover. I think it was such a humbling experience, like being a cover on a show like Six, because it is so hard, because it's such a like moving machine. And I think you realize quickly, I cannot do everything perfectly. I just need to be able to do it.
Do it at all, yeah.
Yeah. And that just has to be good enough sometimes. And then over time, now that I've done, both my covers and I've now done a third and I've done them loads of times, I know like, okay, I've got it. It's in my brain now. So now I can kind of add the finishing touches and make it a little more spicy in this bit or this and that and the third. But even still, we all make mistakes. Even we've done it so many times, all of us, we still make mistakes. We'll still do things wrong. We still sing the wrong harmonies. We still whatever. But that's just because we're human. And I think it's so rather than being disheartened by that, I almost have to find a level of rest and comfort in it because,
Mm,
you know, I'm not expected to be perfect. Like if
yeah.
anything, like in God's weakness, in my weakness, God's strength is made perfect. And so
Mm,
actually that can't be true if I am perfectly strong.
yeah.
And the word of the Lord is right and true. So therefore, like it's okay for me to be weak. It's
Mm,
okay for me to be imperfect, right?
yeah.
Um so yeah, I kind of have to balance all those thoughts in my mind and just bring myself back to that truth that I am not perfect.
Mm,
And but also if God has set something for me, it won't go by me. And just yeah, trust that his plan is perfect.
that's amazing. You've been such a helpful and encouraging voice, even for someone who doesn't work in theatre. I feel like they're important truths for all of us to remember, actually. So my final question would just be kind of how would you, and you've done lots of this already, but how would you encourage other Christians working in theatre? And do you have any advice for people maybe listening to this who are trying to kind of make it, for want of a better phrase, in the industry? Yeah, what would you kind of leave them with?
Um I think ultimately trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding.
Mm,
I think, especially in an industry like this, it can be so easy to think that you have control because you just think, well, if I go in the room and I do the, if I sing the songs well and I read the lines well and I dance the dance well, there's no reason why it shouldn't be mine. And that, in a way, is true, but it just is never that simple. And so I think all you can do is go and continue to do your best, but just trust that if God has placed you there, He will make a way for you there and He will guide you through it. And it might be in ways that you didn't think it would happen. It might come through opportunities that you didn't think would happen. That was definitely my situation with Six. I didn't expect it to be something that I was going to do. Um, but I think one has to just have a level of trust in God and a level of confidence in Him that those who trust in him and those who honor him won't be put to shame. And I think it can feel easy to think, no, I've got to compromise on this and I've got to do this and I've got to, if I just maybe act a bit more like this, then I maybe would feel like I fit into this industry more and whatever. But I
mm,
think actually if you just focus on trusting God, then like he will really make provision for you. And I think if it's your dream to be in an industry like this and to do this job, like it's possible. I think it can feel really isolating, especially as a Christian. I know I felt that, like you just feel like there's no one else who does this and is also a Christian and balances those two things. But I think it's definitely possible. And I think um, we're all here somewhere. We just need to put our hands up and say, here we are, like, and we're here to support each other. But I think, yeah, trust in God. Don't lean on your own understanding or how you think this should work and the job that you think you should get and all that kind of stuff. Because it's okay to have those visions. Like we're made as people who should have vision, but don't cling to that so much
mm.
to the point where you don't trust and put your confidence in God and in His ultimate plan for you.
Mm.
Naomi, thank you so much for joining us. We've so appreciated the opportunity to talk with you. Just two questions before we finish. One is I'd be really interested to know who your favourite Henry VIII wife is. So that's the first question. And then the second is how can people keep track of what you're up to and what you'll be up to next?
She's my favorite. The point of the show is that we're not supposed to have favorites.
So
Ah,
picking a favourite child.
um, but in the context of the show, I'd say my favorite queen is Catherine of Aragon. She has a really great song, which I love a lot. So I'll say that in the context of the show.
very good.
But I think they're all fantastic women. And in terms of keeping track of me, I suppose that would be best done on Instagram. My
Yeah.
Instagram is Naomi Alade 1. Yeah, and that's pretty much maybe the only place you'll find me.
And do you know what happens next? I mean, for example, how far in advance are you planning? So if you're in Six at the moment, is that just for the foreseeable future and then see what happens? Or do you have a sense that, in such and such a time, you'll be somewhere else?
So in Six, my contract is until February.
Right.
2025. And then who's to know? But God, what's going to happen next at this point? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, exciting. We've really enjoyed talking with you,
Yeah.
Naomi. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, there's our introduction to the theatre, Grace.
Absolutely.
What did you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would really like to get tickets to go and see Six. I
Yeah.
feel like, not least because I'd love to see Naomi perform, or Naomi in action. But I also just thought, or did she say? She said it was a kind of like there were bits of Britney and Beyonce
Yeah.
mixed with.
What's there not to like, Grace?
I was going to say that's one way of selling something up front. But no, I thought it was a really interesting discussion. As I mentioned in the podcast, if I'm honest, I think, aside from thinking, a little bit in advance about what we might like to ask Naomi, I haven't probably given much / any thought to the connection between the Christian story and theatre specifically. But I thought she clearly has, which is always why it's so good to have guests on this rather than, you and I just kind of pondering things together. So one of the things that struck me quite early on was when she spoke about this idea of, every good story having people existing within a story, and there's this moment of kind of conflict or of a problem or the kind of a hurdle, which means that they need help or that something has to change. And it reminded me a bit of my kind of very early school days where you'd be asked to write a story and it would have to have different parts to it. And I suppose actually in lots of ways that in itself is modeled on the acts of scripture, even if teachers.
What's it called? Is it the staircase or the ladder or something?
It might. I mean, I feel like that's probably a more model now. Is it? Well, Paul, you've got children at school, so it could well
something
be
like that. I
it
think
could be, yeah.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, but I thought it was interesting how actually there was, that's what we see in scripture, and actually that is what makes any good story. I thought it was really interesting, her reflections when we asked her about, what did she think of Jesus as a storyteller, and the first thing she said was that actually to be a good storyteller you have to be compassionate. And actually that sense of, when we kind of receive stories best is actually when we feel like we're seen or heard or understood in some sense of them. And actually when we look at Jesus, the reason that he was able to engage with crowds of people and kind of present things in a way that was not just relevant but actually meaningful was because he understood the times, he understood the people who he was speaking to. And it made me think actually what a tough job it is to write a really good, whether it's theatre production or film or whatever, because actually, when you think about when you sit in a theatre, all of the people in the room have, different homes they live in, different family contexts, different work contexts, and actually it's quite a big ask to then try and find something which unifies them. But I'm fascinated to know kind of what, when she was talking about how sometimes, they can tell that an audience perhaps is a bit it's taking more to try and engage them, or they're a bit slower to laugh, or whatever it is. And I'm fascinated. I should have asked her really, but what does that look like in the context of a cast to try and have this unified sense of, okay, we all need to be on the same page here, that this is what we need to do. I mean, I don't know, maybe they have an earpiece, or I don't know. These are a tough one tonight, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they just make signs to each other or something.
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, what did you think, Paul?
Yes, well, really interesting insight into the life of an actor and the joys of that, but also the challenges of that, the isolation of that, the insecurity of that, which I thought was so interesting. And like you, I'm definitely keen to go and watch Six. I'll ask you later, Grace, who your favourite wife of Henry VIII is. I thought the idea that theatre is different to film was a really interesting one. So I love the way she talked about the fact that you get this instant feedback from an audience, in the moment, whether it's going down well or not. And that when the audience respond in a way that is positive or appreciative, that I think Naomi said that is the best thing ever. And I can see how that is so, and love therefore thinking about the idea about then the the person attending a show being an active participant in it. And it's interesting what Naomi was saying in terms of the six. I think the other one that's on at the moment is Witness for the Prosecution. And in that play, some of the audience are part of the jury. And that, again, is another way in which you're very clearly, as an audience participant, an actor in the story too. But of course, the way that then plays out in terms of the Christian story and the fact that we're not simply there to kind of see the story or hear it, but we're invited to be active participants in it, I think it's kind of a powerful idea. I think also I was very struck by what Naomi said about the difficulty of rejection, that's a low point in the life of an actor. And I guess part of that is that it's so freighted, because as an actor, you presumably you are giving your whole self to a role, and to some extent you're putting your heart on your sleeve, and therefore if you're rejected for a part, it must be hard to feel that it's not personal in some way, that you have been rejected, as it were, for the role. So that was interesting. And maybe the kind of summary of all of that is maybe having listened now to Naomi, that will change my experience of the theatre in the future, because I'll just be kind of framing it a bit differently, thinking a bit differently, maybe a little bit more attentive to what's going on. I do remember on one occasion, actually, a long time ago, I think it was Hamlet. I think it's the only time I have literally fallen asleep in the theatre, but it was
really
so long.
okay.
And where I was right in the gods, the kind of very top of the theatre,
couldn't see you anywhere then.
It was awkward because I was with a group of friends, and they changed the date of this theatre trip so that I could attend. So that was really nice. And then obviously I just let the side down a little bit, but Hamlet is long.
Those poor actors, Paul. Imagine how
I know. Well, this is the point.
Yeah.
I now should think differently about that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. And another interesting. Yeah, it's always good when you leave a podcast and you think, what I want to go to do now is engage with that thing we've spoken about. And I think for both of us, that looks like maybe a whole life podcast field trip. Or
well, let's do it. Let's do it. Good outing, Grace. Now, tell me, before we go, any thoughts on your favourite Henry VIII wife?
I think I would have to say probably nothing to do with her character specifically, but I think I could have a vivid memory of an art class at school trying to draw Anne Boleyn,
Nice.
and I feel like I sort of for some reason have a fondness towards her, probably because I just looked at her picture for so long trying to see the portrait.
Feisty character, I think.
Very feisty.
Yes.
That'd probably be mine. Have you got a top wife?
Well, I suppose I'd always quite admired Thomas Cromwell, who's sort of the if you've ever watched The West Wing, he's the sort of Leo McGarry figure, the kind of chief of staff, but basically he seems to pull the strings a bit. In terms of favourite wife, I mean, probably it would be Naomi's. So Catherine of Aragon. I was at a school that Henry VIII founded, and his wife was buried in the cathedral of the city where my school was. So I feel a certain loyalty towards her, frankly, Grace. And I feel that she was very resilient, being the first wife, but also the way then that she sort of endured beyond being divorced. So yeah, I'd admiration for Catherine of Aragon, I think.
There we go. Well, that's us, isn't it, today, Paul?
It is. It's been great, isn't it? If you've enjoyed this episode, I mean, how could you not? Quite honestly, we've enjoyed it enormously. I hope you have. We'd love you to give us a review, leave a review. That would be really nice. Tell all your friends about it. But until next time, from Grace and me, that was the Whole Life Podcast. Look forward to seeing you again.
Bye, everyone.